Mia had always enjoyed the quiet of her small apartment. It was filled with cozy warmth, lit by the soft glow of fairy lights draped around her bookshelves. Nights alone didn't bother her. She found solace in her own company, tucked away from the world. That is, until she began to notice something. It started subtly, just brief flashes that she shrugged off, explanations and rationalizations rolling easily off her tongue. Perhaps she hadn't slept well, or maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. But a few nights ago, as she prepared to go to bed, she glimpsed a movement in her bedroom mirror, a fleeting shadow, like someone slipping out of sight just as she turned to look. She froze, staring at her own reflection, heart racing, but saw nothing unusual. With a laugh that was more nervous than amused, she muttered to herself about watching too many horror movies before bed. Days passed without further incident, and she almost convinced herself that it was all just her imagination. But last night, as she brushed her teeth in the bathroom, her reflection held a disturbing surprise. The shadowy figure was back, but it wasn't a quick flicker this time. As Mia looked up from the sink, she saw it, a faint shape standing just behind her right shoulder. It had no distinct features, only a mist-like face with empty black pits where eyes should have been. She froze, gripping the edge of the sink, her mind a blur of shock and disbelief. The figure remained still, lingering in the mirror's reflection, as if waiting for her to turn around and face it. With a pounding heart, Mia spun around to confront it, only to find nothing there. The bathroom was empty, save for her and the soft hum of the bathroom fan. Swallowing hard, she glanced back at the mirror. Her reflection was alone once more. That night, she barely slept, haunted by the sensation of being watched. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the figure looming just beyond her vision, its presence thick and suffocating, like a dense fog pressing down on her chest. Mia tried to tell herself it was a dream, that maybe she'd hallucinated it, but the memory was too vivid. And then, just when she thought she'd managed to calm her racing thoughts, her phone screen lit up with a soft glow. She picked it up, the dark screen reflecting her face and something else. There, staring back at her, was the ghostly figure, its lifeless eyes locked on her through the small screen. She dropped the phone, her heart pounding as it clattered onto the floor. Gasping, she turned every light in the apartment on, casting away every shadow she could find. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Somewhere in her mind, she knew she was not alone. The following morning, Mia sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Her eyes felt heavy, but she didn't dare sleep, fearful of what she might see in the dark. As the morning sunlight filtered through her window, Mia began to feel a little foolish. In the daylight, her fears seemed ridiculous, mere shadows in the night, surely nothing real. But the creeping sensation of being watched, even now, hadn't left her. Every now and then, her gaze would drift toward her phone, resting on the table, screen darkened and face down, as though to prevent anything from peeking back at her. She kept telling herself she needed a distraction, something to shake off this irrational fear. Determined to get out of her apartment and back to normal life, Mia grabbed her bag and headed out. She wandered through the local shops, trying to convince herself that this was exactly what she needed, a dose of the ordinary to remind her of reality. But everywhere she went, reflective surfaces pulled at her gaze. She caught herself staring too long at store windows, her mind half expecting to see that dark figure lingering in the glass. In one shop, while browsing through a rack of clothes, she glanced at the mirror opposite her. For a moment, she was horrified to see the same shadowed figure in the reflection, just over her shoulder, too close for comfort. Her breath hitched as she forced herself to look away. When she looked back, it was gone, as if it had been nothing but a figment of her imagination. Yet she felt the undeniable cold prickle of dread tightening around her. She left the shop hurriedly, ignoring the curious stares of other shoppers. The longer she walked, the more intense her anxiety became, her paranoia amplifying with each passing window. The city was full of reflective surfaces, and Mia realized just how many places that eerie figure could appear, lurking, waiting for her to look. Back home, She decided to call her best friend Lily. It had been a while since they caught up, and maybe Lily could talk some sense into her, help her shake this unsettling feeling. "Hey, Mia, it's been too long. How are you?" Lily's voice was a burst of warmth, a brief comfort to Mia's rattled nerves. Mia took a shaky breath, unsure how to explain. "I know this sounds insane, but I think I'm being followed. Or maybe it's haunted. I don't even know anymore." Whoa, slow down. What do you mean? By who? It's not a person. It's something else. It only shows up in reflections, like in mirrors or windows. I keep seeing this shadowy figure. It's just there, watching me." Lily was silent for a moment. "Are you sure you're not just stressed out? It could be lack of sleep, you know?" Mia hesitated, clinging to the hope that Lily might be right. "Maybe. I don't know. But it feels real, like it's there, even when I can't see it." There was a brief pause before Lily spoke again, her voice soft but concerned. "Maybe you just need a break. Come stay at my place for a night or two. Get away from your apartment. It'll give you some space to clear your mind." Relieved, Mia agreed. The thought of getting away from her mirrors and screens was a comfort. Within the hour, she packed a small bag, locked up her apartment, and made her way to Lily's. But as she left, a strange feeling washed over her. Her apartment felt empty, too empty, like something had been waiting for her to leave. The night at Lily's was better, at least initially. The comfort of her friend's cheerful presence helped ease Mia's mind, and by the time they settled in for a late-night movie, she almost felt normal again. She tried to focus on the screen, on the mundane thrill of a light-hearted film, reminding herself that the strange shadows were far behind her. But then Lily's bathroom door creaked open. Mia, sitting on the edge of the couch, felt the hairs on her arms stand on end. She glanced over, seeing the bathroom mirror just barely visible from where she sat. In the mirror's edge, she saw it. The same dark figure, clearer than ever, standing there, its face obscured but its eyes fixed on her, empty and chilling. Frozen in terror, Mia let out a strangled gasp. She turned to Lily, who was laughing at something on the screen, oblivious. "Lily," Mia whispered, her voice shaking. "Do you see that?" Lily turned toward the bathroom door, but her face showed only confusion. "See what?" And when Mia looked back, the figure was gone. The next morning, Mia woke in Lily's guest room, feeling the weight of the previous night's terror hanging over her. She'd barely slept, her eyes drifting toward any reflective surface, expecting to see the shadowy figure lurking there. The quiet stillness of the house felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Over breakfast, Lily studied her friend's pale, tired face with concern. "Mia, this is really starting to worry me. You're not yourself. I think you should talk to someone. Maybe it's just stress, like I said before." Mia tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a shaky, hollow sound. "It's more than stress, Lily. I don't know what's happening, but it feels real. It's like I'm being hunted." A thought struck Mia, a vague memory her grandmother had once shared with her when she was a child, something about restless spirits that followed families through generations. She'd brushed it off as a ghost story, but now it seemed less absurd. And then she remembered the box. Her grandmother's box of old, mysterious trinkets stored in her closet back at her apartment. The only inheritance she'd left Mia, along with those haunting words. Asterisk, be careful with the mirrors, child. Sometimes they hold more than just your reflection. Asterisk, chills spread over her skin. What if the ghostly figure was connected to her grandmother's belongings? She hadn't thought about that box in years, hadn't even opened it since her grandmother's funeral. A nagging urge tugged at her. She needed to go back to her apartment and open that box. Around noon, Mia said goodbye to Lily, assuring her that she was feeling better and that a little time at home might help. Lily didn't seem convinced, but she let Mia go, cautioning her to call if she felt afraid again. Back in her apartment, Mia felt the familiar sensation of eyes on her, the unsettling notion that something was watching her every move. She went straight to her bedroom closet and pulled out the dusty, worn wooden box. The air felt colder as she ran her fingers over the carved symbols on the lid, hesitant yet determined. She opened the box, and inside, she found a collection of old family photos, strange charms, and a small, tarnished mirror. The sight of the mirror made her breath hitch. It was cracked in one corner, and the glass was dark, as though it had absorbed years of sorrow. She held it up, heart pounding as she stared into it, half expecting the figure to appear. And then, as her reflection wavered in the dim, cracked glass, she saw something move, a hand, reaching from the other side. Mia screamed and dropped the mirror, backing away as it shattered against the floor. She covered her mouth, horrified. The shadowy figure had been there, in the reflection, closer than ever. A sudden knock at her door broke her trance. She turned, heartbeat thundering, and cautiously went to open it, only to find no one there. The hallway was empty, but a cold draft drifted in, thick with a strange, metallic smell. The door had never opened on its own before. Mia stepped back, her eyes wide as she scanned her apartment. Every mirror, every piece of glass, seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as though something was trying to break free. Desperate for answers, she turned to the photos in the box, flipping through the old, faded images. Her heart sank as she recognized a face in one of the photos, a dark, shadowy figure in the background, nearly indistinguishable but hauntingly familiar. She flipped through the photos faster, and there it was again, a figure lurking behind her grandmother in one photo, watching her from a mirror in another. It had been there, haunting her family, waiting. Just as she realized this, her phone lit up with a notification. The screen reflected her pale face and something else. The figure was there again, its face clearer, its empty, black eyes almost human, almost alive. It stared back at her with a terrifying hunger, as though the boundary between its world and hers was thinning. Without thinking, Mia hurled her phone across the room, shattering the screen against the wall. Her breaths came out in ragged gasps as she backed into the corner, curling up, feeling the weight of the unseen presence closing in around her. As Mia sat trembling in the corner, her mind raced. The broken mirror on the floor, the shattered phone screen, the photos of her grandmother. The pieces were coming together in a horrifying way. This wasn't a haunting of her home. This was something much darker, something that had been attached to her family for generations. And somehow, through her, it had found a way to grow stronger. Mia felt a wave of dread wash over her. She needed to escape. Just the thought of staying alone in her apartment, surrounded by the reflective surfaces it could use to watch her, was unbearable. But where would she go? The thing followed her everywhere, lurking in shop windows, screens, and even the smallest reflections. In a rush of panic, Mia tore through her apartment, grabbing blankets and sheets. One by one, she covered every reflective surface, the large mirror in her bedroom, the hallway mirror, the glass cabinet doors. She even threw a scarf over the television, leaving nothing that could reflect. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of relief. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, the darkness in her apartment grew thicker. With no reflective surfaces, the room felt claustrophobic, heavy with silence. She tried to read, to distract herself, but the unease didn't leave her. It lurked beneath her skin, a prickle of awareness, reminding her that the thing was still there, waiting. As she sat in her bedroom, the covered mirror on her wall began to rustle. The sheet slipped, falling to the floor. Her heart hammered as she forced herself to look up. In the dim, shadowed glass, she saw it. The figure wasn't just in the background this time. It was directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the details of its distorted face, its eyes black as voids, its mouth twisting into a cruel, mocking smile. It raised a hand, pressing it against the inside of the glass. Her reflection mirrored her shock and terror, but the figure seemed unfazed, almost amused. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't look away as the figure pressed harder, the glass warping beneath its touch as though it was pushing through, forcing itself into her world. The surface of the mirror rippled, and then, with a sharp crack, a hairline fracture spread across the glass. In that instant, Mia's resolve broke. She grabbed a book from her nightstand and hurled it at the mirror, watching it shatter into shards that scattered across the floor. Each shard reflected pieces of the figure's twisted face, fragments that slowly dissolved into shadow. Mia stared at the mess, breathing heavily, half expecting the figure to reappear. But for the moment, she was alone. She stumbled into the hallway, trying to catch her breath, and caught sight of herself in the polished glass of her front door, a door she had forgotten to cover. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and wide-eyed, but then her stomach dropped. There, standing just behind her shoulder in the reflection, was the figure once again. Panicking, she whipped around, expecting to see it looming over her, but the hallway was empty. Yet when she turned back to the door, the reflection was still there, its fingers stretching toward her as if reaching out to touch her. She backed away, heart pounding, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. It was as if the figure wasn't just in the reflections anymore. It was in her. It had become part of her reality, slipping closer with each shattered piece of glass. With trembling hands, Mia pulled out her phone, the shattered screen flickering faintly. She dialed Lily's number, desperate to hear a familiar voice. "Lily," she whispered when her friend picked up. "I don't know what to do. It's everywhere. It's in everything I see." "Mia?" Lily's voice was tense, laced with worry. "Listen, you need to get out of there. Get rid of every reflective surface if you have to. But you have to leave, Mia. Come stay with me, just until you're safe." "Safe?" Mia's voice cracked. "I don't think it's going to stop, Lily. It's in the mirrors, but I think it wants more. It wants me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then you need to face it, Mia. Whatever this thing is, it's feeding off your fear. Don't let it control you. You're stronger than it." Mia's eyes drifted to the broken shards on her bedroom floor, her pulse steadying as a grim determination settled over her. She'd been running, hiding from this presence, but Lily was right. She had to face it, to end this once and for all. Determined to end this nightmare, Mia gathered every mirror shard from her bedroom floor, her fingers trembling as she handled the broken pieces. Each fragment held a sliver of the figure's image, distorted but watchful, like 100 tiny eyes staring back at her. It didn't matter. She wouldn't let fear control her any longer. She walked back to the wooden box, placing the shards inside along with her grandmother's strange mirror and the old photos. This was the final piece of her family's twisted inheritance, the secret her grandmother had hinted at but never explained. Whatever curse had followed her bloodline, Mia was determined to face it and break it. With a shaky breath, she took the box and walked to the bathroom, the darkest, most reflective space in her apartment. She set the box down on the sink and looked up, meeting her own gaze in the mirror above. Her reflection looked pale, haunted, but her eyes held a fierce determination she hadn't seen in herself before. As she stared into the mirror, the reflection began to darken, the edges of the glass clouding over as though mist were creeping in from the corners. Her reflection flickered, and then, slowly, the figure appeared again, emerging from the shadows. This time, its face was fully visible. Sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, and a mouth twisted into a cruel, knowing smile. It watched her, motionless, its presence almost taunting. "Why me?" Mia whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Why are you doing this?" The figure didn't respond, but as she stared into its void-like eyes, a cold realization struck her. This wasn't just a spirit haunting her family. It was something ancient, something that had clung to the mirrors, feeding off fear, off generations of lives. And now, it had claimed her. The figure reached out a hand in the reflection, its fingers claw-like, sharp and deadly. Without thinking, Mia reached up, mirroring its movement, her fingers trembling as they touched the surface of the glass. The cold was bone-chilling, numbing her skin, but she held steady, refusing to back down. The mirror seemed to ripple, as if it were made of liquid. Her hands sank into it, inch by inch, until her entire arm disappeared, as though the mirror had become a portal. A terrible, icy pull gripped her, drawing her closer, urging her into the dark, endless space beyond. Every instinct screamed at her to pull back, to run, but she held on, determined to confront the figure. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, letting the mirror swallow her whole. On the other side, she found herself in a world of shadow and mist. It was a place of endless reflections, broken and fragmented, showing her 1,000 different versions of herself. In each mirror, she saw herself standing alone, terrified, vulnerable. And within the reflections, the figure lurked, its image multiplying, filling every shard, every surface. Mia, a voice hissed, low and raspy, like a whisper from beyond the grave. It wasn't coming from the figure, but from everywhere, reverberating through the shadowed realm. She forced herself to stand tall, even as the figure moved closer, its eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice echoing through the void. The figure recoiled slightly, its expression twisting with rage. It lunged at her, its shadowy form spreading across the mirrors like ink, closing in around her. Mia fought against the oppressive darkness, her mind reaching for something, anything that could protect her. And then she remembered the small charm in her grandmother's box. She reached in her pocket and pulled it out, a tiny, tarnished pendant etched with strange symbols. She held it up, feeling warmth radiate from it, and the figure paused, its face twisted in pain as the light from the charm grew brighter, illuminating the darkness. With a shout, she pressed the pendant against the nearest mirror, watching as the figure writhed and screamed, its form fracturing, splintering into pieces that began to dissolve into the mist. One by one, the reflections around her shattered, the fragments falling away until all that remained was her own reflection, whole and clear. The darkness lifted, and Mia felt herself being pulled back, out of the mirror world, back into her bathroom. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the sink as she gasped for breath. The box lay open on the counter, empty now, the charm pulsing softly in her hand. Every mirror, every reflection in her apartment was silent, the oppressive presence gone. She took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of freedom settle over her. The mirrors, once her torment, now reflected only herself, her face exhausted but unafraid. Whatever curse had haunted her family, it was over. She'd faced the darkness, and won. As she closed the box for the last time, she whispered a quiet goodbye, not just to the shadow that had tormented her, but to her grandmother, to the secrets left unspoken and the strength she'd finally found within herself. The mirrors would never haunt her again.